Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a legend in the world of tech. He was the first employee of Google and helped to make it the global brand that it is today as Director of Technology. After he left in 2012, he has focused on learning for those with limited access. He has worked for Khan Academy and is the founder of Echidna Giving, helping girls to complete secondary education. On top of this, he's an enthusiastic gamer. My guest this week is Craig Silverstein. Craig, welcome to the cabin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, my first question is, how difficult was it for you to choose the 5 games to take with you?
It was really easy because I ignored the Doomsday part of it and just picked 5 games that I thought were interesting to talk about. If there was actually a Doomsday, I probably wouldn't take any games at all. I'd just take a bunch of cards and a bunch of dice and some paper and pen and write down rules to as many games as I could remember while I was holed up in the cabin.
So would you say then that you're a practical person? How long do you think you'd last in the event of an apocalypse?
Yeah, I think that in the event of apocalypse, I don't know when I would have time to play games again. It's hard enough to play games with 3 children. I can't imagine having to do it while foraging for food and defending myself from the alien invaders.
Well, you're very lucky because in this mandated future apocalypse, there are particular times set aside for game playing, so you'll be fine in that case.
I see. The alien jailers give us like recess?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
And so, how attached are you to your games? Would it be a tragedy for you to see them immolated in a fireball, or would you be perfectly happy just to let them all go?
Well, given my life situation now with 3 small kids, I barely have time to play games as it is, so I miss them, but I've gotten used to not having them.
And so you don't have a big games collection, a room sort of devoted to it then?
Oh, I have a big games collection that is untouched. It's collecting dust. It's not that big, actually. I thought I had a big games collection, but it turns out that all those games belong to a friend of mine who had just been storing them at my house.
And so, sort of, how attached are you in general to sort of material possessions? Do you think the apocalypse would be difficult for you in that sense?
I'm very attached to like eating and stuff like that, but I don't have that much stuff. I value like experiences more than things. On the other hand, my computer has a lot of stuff on it, including like 40,000 photos. And
so, are you a person who, I mean, I guess you would be being, so high up in Google. Do you embrace the digital? Because I speak to so many people, as soon as ebooks became a thing, I was happy to jettison my book collection and just keep everything on a hard drive. Are you someone like that? Do you go for the digital option at every available opportunity?
That's really interesting. I feel like people who work in tech tend to be much more pragmatic about the use of technology. They understand kind of limitations and that, using the latest and greatest electronic gizmo is making a trade-off. I don't typically do ebooks myself, though I'm starting to do it more because our library has a huge ebook collection and it's a lot easier to check them out on ebook than it is to actually like go to the library or wait for a book to come to be shipped to me. So I find myself using ebooks more and more, but I would still use a paper book given the option. I just feel like it's much easier to not have to worry about plugging it in and stuff like that. So with a lot of technological things, I'm like, it's probably more trouble than it's worth to do it the newfangled.
And were you privy at your time at Google to sort of the innovations that the consumer would get? Would you get them sort of 2 years earlier and go, oh, this will be interesting. I wonder how this will work out?
I did get Gmail before everyone else. I got my pick of the Gmail addresses because it was opened up internally before it was open to the rest of the world. So and it's hard to imagine now, but at the time Gmail was a really revolutionary mail experience. So having access to that was really something I was like, wow, that's going to be really amazing when it hit.
Yeah, I got in on Gmail when you still had to be invited. So I think I'm part of a select group. But what was so revolutionary about Gmail as opposed to Hotmail or Yahoo Mail or something like that?
Gmail was basically the first major JavaScript application, which means that it runs in your browser as opposed to on a server. So it was a lot snappier because it didn't have to do all this round trip communication back to the server to do anything. If you go back to those old email clients and, it's like 40 seconds to go to the next mail message because your internet is slow or something like that. Having something like Gmail where everything happens on the browser instantaneously is like a game changer. And
so did you feel at the time that Google was going to be a game changer?
I did not. When I started Google, I didn't feel like it was. I mean, I hoped it would be a game changer because I thought that the technology was game changing. I joined Google because I used it when it was still a research project at Stanford and was like blown away by the better quality of the search results. It was like not just like something that you would like measure 10% or something. It was like 10 times better or 100 times better. But I also knew that having the better technology is no guarantee of success in the technology world. So I had no idea how it would go. But eventually people started introducing me to Google, not knowing that I worked there. And were like, you have to try the search engine. It's amazing. And I'm like, how did you hear about it? And it wasn't through me or through anyone I knew. And that's when I knew that it was going to be big.
So I want to go back to the beginning then. When did games enter your life? Did you come from a family of gamers? Did you play them at your grandmother's knee?
That's really interesting. I did play games growing up, but they were terrible games. I played like Monopoly and Yahtzee and this game that was a trick-taking game but somehow involved gems. These are not games that I would play now, but I did enjoy playing them at the time. But it wasn't like I wouldn't have described myself as a gamer. I played board games as a kid, just the way that people normally do, I think. But I got introduced to games again after grad school. My grad school roommate, who had moved into his own place, had a party, and his next door neighbor was there. This guy named Matt Leacock.
Wow.
Yeah, it was before he had published anything, I'm pretty sure, but he was still played games, and he brought some games over, and I played one of them at the party and was blown away. I was like, wow, this is like the most fun I've ever had in my entire life.
I mean, do you remember what that first game was?
Yeah, it was Elfenland.
Oh, the Alan Moon one, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the one with the boots, and it's very interactive when you play with 6 players, which we were. And I remember there was a lot of table talk, and I was doing table talk as well, even though it was my first game. And then Matt's wife, who had been like quiet as a mouse the whole game, like roared from behind on the last turn to victory. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know that could happen in game.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Pandemic was the one that really first opened my eyes. So that's really interesting. And I remember that thought when Pandemic, I think, has the best mechanic in board gaming, and that's where you have the outbreak and you take the cities and you shuffle them and you put them back on top of the deck, and that does nothing but wrench up the tension. And I remember thinking, wow, games are this. It was a real sort of light bulb moment.
Yeah, I helped play test Pandemic actually. And it was really interesting to see the evolution. That part of the game had always been part of it, but there are these other parts as well that added a bit more complexity to the game. And it was interesting to see him kind of pare it down to the essence of what made the game like full of tension and really interesting.
And so, as a playtester, were you surprised that Pandemic became what it was, or was it like, this is brilliant?
Yeah, I was surprised because the first version was a little fiddly. I remember thinking, wow, this is fun, but it's a little fiddly. And it wasn't the first game of his that I had play tested. And, some of the other ones that I play tested still haven't come. He's still kind of working on trying to get them to where he's happy with the quality. But even as the game got better and better, and I'd play test it again, I'd be like, wow, it's really a lot better now than the first time. For some reason, that first memory is the one that stuck in my head. So for a long time, I pegged Pandemic as kind of a fiddly game, and it wasn't until it came out and I started playing the production version enough times that kind of replaced my initial impression. As I say, it was my entrance to games, and I wouldn't be where I am now without it, I don't think. So
you went to school. The reason we're talking is that we were put into contact by Elizabeth Hargrave, and you went to school with her. What was she like at school?
Yeah, I went to primary school with her. I have known her for a long time. She became interested in board games a little bit later in life. I would not have pegged her as a board gamer growing up. The way I kind of thought of her, she was like a member of the arts magazine and kind of hung out with a little bit of the hippie crowd. So, I would describe her as kind of a free spirit and, kind of an independent thinker. Also very smart. So I have stayed friends with her since high school. We've been in touch for I don't even want to say how many years. I find that, we get along really well together. Her personality and mine, I think, are really, really compatible. So I guess it's no surprise that we both kind of found this love of board games.
And I assume you've played Wingspan, and how happy are you that she won the Kennerspiel?
I've not played Wingspan. I have to wait in line to get a copy like everyone else. But I'm really, really happy for her and really, really excited for her.
And so you studied computer science. So what drew you to that area, and when did you first feel an affinity with a computer?
I started programming in middle school, which would be when I was 10 or 12. And I was interested in it from the beginning. I would do it as a hobby. I would write computer programs that would help me do schoolwork or organize my notebooks or whatever, just for fun. So I always had been interested in computers and enjoyed working with them, but I wasn't planning on doing them professionally. I actually had 5 different majors that I considered in college before I ended up doing computer science.
And what were those majors?
Ooh, gosh. The first one was chemistry, and because I liked chemistry and was good at it, and I felt like that was kind of a thing that people could do for their life. But then I took an organic chemistry class, and the next day went to the school office to pick a different major. And I went through history of science and mathematics and English. I was almost an English major.
And did you sort of, when you started doing the course, did you suddenly think, here I am?
Yeah, I guess one reason I didn't want to do it was because I'd already done a lot of programming myself, on the side, and was I don't need to study it in school. I've kind of already done it as an extracurricular. Why would I do it in school? But then I found out there was a lot more to computer science as a discipline than just writing computer programs. And it was actually, I learned a ton, and it was really interesting.
And I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day who's a computer scientist, and I asked him sort of, who's the Einstein of computer science? And he gave me an answer. I'd be interested to know, who do you think is the Einstein of computer science?
The Turing Award is the award that you give to the best computer scientist. And in some sense, Turing was the founder of modern computer science. He kind of invented the mathematical idea, a mathematical description of what a computer is. And so, usually you think of him as kind of the founding light of computers. But Einstein, it's not like Einstein invented physics. I would say that, I would say that Turing is more like the Newton.
And, a lot of what Einstein thought and wrote is still applicable in physics today. Is that the same with Turing, or has he been sort of, is he now outdated in a lot of the way that Newton is?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Newton's not really outdated either. I mean, most of the time people aren't using Einstein's formulas, they're using Newton's formulas. It's only in very special cases you have to move beyond that. But I would say with Turing, it's a different story. It's not that he discovered things or invented things that you use or you don't use. It's that he developed the fabric that everyone else works in. So it's kind of like the universe of computer science is his universe, and we're all doing stuff inside of it. So it's not that it's outdated or not outdated. It's when you think about computers, you think about it the way that he described it.
And so at college, I was doing some research today, and you wrote some papers with Sergey Brin, who was the founder of Google. And one of them, I looked at the title and I thought, I have absolutely no idea what that means, and it would be interesting to see if you could explain it to me. One of them was called Scalable Techniques for Mining Casual Structures. Now, bear in mind, I have the computer knowledge of a 6-year-old. So actually nowadays, much less than a 6-year-old. So what was that paper about?
Okay, so here's what I remember about it. I do remember it was actually scalable techniques for mining causal structures. So, you have some causal structures and you want to mine them, but you want to do it using a scalable technique. This was the paper for you. Does that help clear it up?
That is absolutely crystal clear. And I'm sure my computer science friends are going, my God, you're an idiot. But that's fine.
No. Yeah, so this was a paper that I wrote and that Sergey helped me with. And the idea behind it is that you have a huge amount of data, like way too big to go through by hand, and you want to say something interesting about it. You don't know if there's anything interesting in the data, but if there is, you want to find it. So an example might be the census data. You know all this stuff about 300 million Americans and that they filled out on the forms. You want to say if you can figure out anything interesting about the world from that. So, for instance, you might want to discover that living in a big city causes you to live longer, or maybe that it causes you to live less long. And you want to kind of find these kinds of causal relationships in the data if they exist. So if you just set a computer loose on the data without any kind of preconceptions about what kinds of things you might find, that's called data mining. And in this case, we're mining for causation, so we're mining causal structures, and we were trying to figure out a way to do that was computationally efficient.
When you were working with these people, so were you working with Sergey Brin at Stanford, or was this later on in your career?
Oh, no, I was working with him at Stanford. I was working with him on Google, which started out as a research project at Stanford. I wasn't really working with him before that, though. I knew who he was. It wasn't a very large department. And so Sergey and Larry Brin and I, or Sergey and Larry Brin were working on Google. They kind of started it, and there are a few more people who kind of worked on it as well, and then I joined in and started working on it. And when it became a company, I left grad school to go with them.
And was there a sense that these people you were working with were brilliant, or was it just, part of what you would expect to do in your college course?
Yeah, I mean, Sergey was particularly brilliant. There are these entrance exams that you have to take before you can graduate with a PhD in computer science. And you take them when you enter the program with the idea that by the time you're ready to graduate, 6 years later, you finally passed them all. So it gives you plenty of time to try to pass them. The only one I know who ever passed all of them the first time he took them was Sergey. So I always knew that he was really bright. And Larry, also very smart, but more importantly, he was very entrepreneurial. He had it as a goal that he wanted to found a company from the time he was in grad school. And so was always looking for a good outlet for that. And I think he found one. So the two of them together really had skills necessary to start a successful company.
So your first game then is a classic, and this is El Grande. So when did you first encounter this game?
I don't remember when I first encountered it, but it was one of the first ones that we played once. I was introduced to games, as I mentioned, out of grad school, and one of the first games that my gaming group kind of purchased and started playing. And I know it's really old and kind of like an antique amongst games, but I think it's still really vibrant, and I still love playing it today.
And so, this is the granddaddy of area control games. How do you think it stands up to more modern iterations of the genre?
Well, I like it better than the more modern iterations. I feel like for a lot of these games, you can look. When you're designing a new area control game, you're thinking, what am I going to do differently than the existing games? And so you look at the existing games and you kind of think about the flaws in them, and you can think about how you could overcome them in your version. And El Grande certainly has flaws. It's not a perfect game, and like many games of that era, and many of my favorite games, it has or can have quite a bit of downtime. But I think that El Grande just ends up being really well balanced, and really the pieces fit together really well. What it tries to do, it all fits together into this beautiful, coherent whole, and I think that's really difficult for games to match. So even when a game comes along that solves some of the problems that El Grande has, it maybe isn't quite as finely tuned or as finely honed, and you can feel that when you're playing the game. So I don't want to diss any of these other games, but El Grande is still my favorite of the area control games.
And I mean, where do you think Wolfgang Kramer ranks in the pantheon of designers? Does he deserve to be on the Mount Rushmore of game designers?
Well, I would definitely put him below Elizabeth Hargrave, but otherwise he's really right up there.
You know, it's interesting because in Germany, the score track is called a Kramerleiste, which translates to Kramer track. And it was named after Wolfgang Kramer, which I think is, quite an honor, right?
I think that, people are like, we're living in a golden age of game design right now. And I think when you look at Kramer and you look at Knizia, you look at all these people who really made it happen. I have all sorts of awe for that because you're really taking a world where, no one knows what makes a good game. And they came up with it kind of out of whole cloth. And that's just so impressive to me.
I mean, how do you feel about this? I'm discovering this more and more as I go back in time with games, this sort of era of the late 90s, early 2000s. How do you feel about those kind of games? Does it seem like a sort of golden age?
It definitely does to me. That's when I was playing games the most regularly, and so I'm very familiar with a lot of the games there. And I just loved them. And every time a new game would come out, I'd be like, wow, this is even better than the games that we had before. But I think that now is a golden age as well. I think that the kinds of games that I tend to have time for now, which are kind of more lighter weight, more social games, are better now than they've ever been. You have games like Seven Wonders where there's like very little downtime, and I feel like people are focusing a lot more on the things that matter to me right now as a game player, which is you can play it very quickly, it's interactive, it has very little downtime. I think the games of like 20 years ago, as amazing as they were, didn't focus on those elements as much.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's a focus on not just interlacing mechanics, but the whole experience, right?
Yeah, I think that, these things go in phases, and we're seeing like Gloomhaven is like the hotness now, and it's like the opposite of that. It's like a very immersive experience that takes a really long time to play. But, I think that there's kinds of fads or styles that go in and out of fashion in the gaming world, and I feel like as they do, the quality of the games within the current fashion just keeps getting better and better.
So I want to talk now. I mean, I would be remiss of me if we didn't talk a little bit about Google. So I was doing some research today. Google was far from being the first search engine. What do you think Google did that made it into a verb?
Yeah, so the first search engines really date back to the 1960s. They didn't exist on personal computers then, but, like library systems often had them, and you'd go and you'd use the computer at your university library, and it would be doing searches to find the books. By the time the internet came around, it was basically using that same technology that had been developed for library card catalogs. And the web's just a very different beast. There's a lot more information on web pages than there is in card catalogs, and so you can write a search engine that takes advantage of that extra information to give much better search results. And Google was really the first search engine that did that, or it certainly did it to a much greater degree. It was kind of written from the ground up to do that, rather than taking this older...
Here's some information was Google the first search engine?
60s era. Oh my goodness, my phone is adding some information about this as well, which also is something that didn't happen when Google was first started. So the idea is that Google was kind of written from the ground up with web pages in mind. And it used PageRank, which is this famous technology to look at the links between web pages, but it did a lot of other stuff too that was very web specific that made the search results much better because they were much more targeted towards the way people wrote web pages. And
so what did you actually do at Google? What was your sort of day-to-day responsibility within the company?
Well, at the beginning, there were only three of us, so I did a bit of everything. I wrote the web server, which is the thing that you visit when you actually go to Google that shows you the pages and renders the search results. I worked on the query language. When we started out, there was no not. Right now, you can say I want pages that are about Godzilla, but not the movie Godzilla, and that used to not be possible when Google first started out as a company. And so, I would add features like that. But eventually I kind of settled into an internal engineering quality role. I would work on tools and techniques and guidelines to help make sure that the code quality of the code that people were writing as we hired them stayed high, so that the website was as stable as possible and could evolve as quickly as possible.
So you were pretty much always at the coalface. You didn't become this distant sort of floating management figure then?
That's right. And it was important to me that I was still able to program. I loved programming. I still love programming. And so I tried to stay really close to kind of the engineering side of things and not become kind of a person who's in meetings all day.
And so what was the growth like? I live in Berlin, and there are a lot of startups, and a lot of my friends get jobs in them, and they rent massive offices after being around for 6 months, and then in 12 months they're no longer there and people have to look for jobs. How quick was the growth? How long did it take for Google to be the Google that we know now?
The growth was the growth was always really fast. It just seems really slow when you're very small. It takes, it's like if you say, oh, the company's doubled in size in the last 6 months, that sounds like amazing growth. But when you're 3 people and it takes you 6 months to hire 3 more people, it feels like you're growing really slowly. But I think that objectively, Google was always growing really, really fast. Google was lucky in that it kind of came of age in the middle of a dot-com crash, and so there was a lot of people looking for jobs, and a lot of really good people looking for jobs. And so Google was able to grow and still keep up the quality bar that we wanted to keep, even as other companies were kind of shrinking, and had the money to do this due to a lot of faith by the investors, and eventually figured out about ads, and that was like a money spigot, and then Google was able to grow without worrying about running out of resources.
And so Google is, as I said, it's become a verb now. What do you think Google did? Was it simply the quality of the software, or were there other aspects that made Google what it is today?
I would say it's a combination. There's a lot of luck. I would say the biggest factor that mattered is the timing. That Google came around when the internet was growing too big for people to get their heads around. Before Google, there were other search engines, but really the most popular way to get around the internet was to use a directory, was to use something like Yahoo, where you start at the top and you're like, I want to know more. I want to watch some cat photos. And so you'd start with cats, and then you'd drill down into the kind of cat you wanted and what you wanted them to be doing. And eventually you'd get to some cat photos. But the internet grew too big for that right around the time Google came around. And so search became really important, and people were starting to look at search engines seriously for the first time. People had always been using it, but now people are really thinking, I need to figure out what search engine I'm going to use because I can't get around the web any other way. And then, being there right at the beginning of people having that discussion, Google with its quality lead was a clear choice for a lot of people.
And so why did you end up leaving the company? So you left in 2012.
Yeah, I left in 2012. And Google had become a really big company, and I was finishing up a project and looking for what my place was in the company after finishing that up. And I kept thinking to myself, well, this project's pretty interesting, but it's not as interesting as the stuff that's happening over at Khan Academy, which was also in my hometown. I knew they were just down the road from me, and I already knew about them and had seen the TED Talk that Sal Khan, the founder of Khan Academy, had given, which is really inspiring TED Talk. And I found myself using them as the bar to compare against all the projects I might work on inside Google. And after a while, I was like, why am I trying to compare all these projects to the bar when I could just go work for the bar? And so then I decided that it was time to leave Google and start working for Khan. So it's not like I left Google, it's more like I went to Khan.
So there was no bad feelings, no recrimination?
No, not at all. In fact, for a year or so afterwards, I would still sneak back into Google for lunch because they have the free lunches.
And so Google's former motto was "Don't be evil." It was a very famous thing in their sort of company statutes. How well do you think they've stuck to that motto?
I mean, I think they still have the motto. I guess they actually dropped the motto. So I guess the answer is they haven't stuck to it very well.
I think do the right thing is the motto now.
Yeah, I feel like my feeling about Google is that the people who run Google are well-meaning. And I think that it's not the case that, they get accused a lot of being evil, of like violating the motto by doing the opposite. And I don't think that's true. I don't think they're trying to do anything with evil intent, or even like intent that like helps them at the cost of hurting civilization as a whole. But I do think when you're a giant company and you're in a new space, that there are a lot of issues that come up that people haven't really grappled with before. And I think that, Google has a bias towards thinking about those issues in a certain way as kind of an established giant company leader in the space that maybe isn't the way that makes the most sense for society at large. And so, I think that there's a bunch of well-meaning folks here, but I don't know that people really there's no obvious right answer. And I think that a lot of the ways that Google sees forward are not the ways I think that are eventually going to carry the day.
And I mean, if you were to sort of appraise Google currently, would you say it does a net good for society or a net bad for society, or is that far too rudimentary?
I think that Google's too big a company to be able to say that for the company as a whole. It just has too many disparate parts. I certainly wouldn't want to go to a world that had terrible search engines. I think that there are other search engines now that are good enough compared to Google that if the Google search engine went away, I think that it wouldn't be a huge net loss to society. But I think that Google is pushing the technology in a lot of areas that's going to be really essential for life in the next century or two. And, those areas are going to come with a lot of challenges that we have to figure out. But I think that in general, people are going to look back and be glad that those things happened rather than not glad.
So your next game then is a classic, and we were just talking about this before we started recording, and this is Power Grid. Why are you taking this one to the cabin? I have a thing for games I'm terrible at.
And Power Grid, I almost never win at. And I think it's the reason that I love it is that I haven't figured it out. There are some games where I feel like I figured it out and it's just a matter of execution, or maybe there's some luck component. But Power Grid, I don't ever feel like I figured it out. I was playing just last night, actually. I'm on vacation and had 3 hours to spare and managed to convince everyone else to play Power Grid. And I lost as always. And I thought I was doing so well. And it turns out I wasn't doing well at all. And I love that about the game. I love that there's more for me to learn. I like that it's not obvious, at least to me, who's winning at any given time of the game. I think that avoids a lot of the problems that you have with other kind of games that have a lot of competition inside them, which Power Grid does. And I love the fact that it's kind of like 3 games in one. There's the auction component, and there's this kind of area management component, and there's this resource management component, and they all fit together so beautifully, I think, and really all contribute to the theme. I never thought I would like a game that has a whole stage in it called bureaucracy, but even that kind of fits into the theme.
It's this incredible thing about gaming. I've suddenly become far more interested in medieval farming and trading salt between Russian vassal states. It's really bizarre.
Yeah, I do feel like a lot of Eurogames have, they think about the mechanics first and then try to figure out a theme. And there are few kinds of themes that just naturally map onto the mechanics of the game. And, if you're not interested in medieval spice trading, then you're not. There's a whole category of games that you're going to find the theme's not a good fit for you.
And you said that you sat down and played this last night, but how often do you get that 3 hours of free time to sit down and play something deep like Power Grid?
I think this was the first time I played it since my wedding, which was 7 years ago.
And so where do you sit on the spectrum of gamers? Imagine, time is not an issue. You're in a cabin for the apocalypse and you have endless amounts of time. What's your sort of ideal weight of game?
I would say that El Grande and Power Grid, to my mind, are about similar weight games. And that is the sweet spot for me. At least those two games are. There might be other games of that weight where I feel like there's not enough interesting decisions made, or there's too much downtime. But in general, I love those kinds of 2 to 3 hour games where you have some time to kind of build stuff up and get it running. Nowadays, I tend to play games that are much shorter, like 20 minutes to 30 minutes. The kind of game that's designed to end just as you start to get your machine going. And I like those as well, but I would say that the 2 to 3 hour games is my sweet spot. I don't like the all-day games or the all-weekend games.
And are you a contentious gamer? Is there a lot of smack talk, or are you very focused and thoughtful?
I would say that I have a lot of table talk, but not smack talk. I'm always suggesting objectively the best moves for other people to do, which just as it happens help me as well.
So I want to talk now about the area in which you're expert, which is the internet. So what has been the difference in internet usage that you've seen over your time working in tech?
People use it a lot more. When I first started, the web was a baby. I guess you could say I started working in tech before the web was even invented. And people still use the internet, but they didn't use it the same way they did after the web came along. And now it's so ingrained into life that if, a hacker came in through, the common internet, like the public internet, and, could easily take down, as we see now, it's taking down school systems and cities, holding them for ransom. And you can just imagine, if people were being really malicious, they could take down power stations. Luckily, I've been playing Power Grid, so I could probably start my own, no problem. But, until that happened, there would be a big problem with just running civilization. I think that it's so entwined with civilization right now.
And, there's been a lot of talk recently, a lot of concern over the internet, and a lot of sort of talk about the attention economy. Basically, that's how certain platforms kind of make their money by keeping you on there as long as possible. Do you think companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter have an obligation to discourage addictive online behavior?
Well, I am certainly glad that cell phones or smartphones did not exist when I was in school, because it would have been terrible for me. And I do definitely understand that. I would undoubtedly be a better parent if smartphones weren't around now. I think that addictive online behavior is an issue, whether it's the responsibility of big companies to deal with it, or it's the responsibility of the government to deal with it, or it's some combination. I couldn't say. I think what's really interesting to me is that we're starting to see all these issues, which have always existed. It's not like addictive behavior is new, but we're starting to see them kind of morph into this new form with technology, and it reopens some questions about how do you deal with that. And
do you see that things like, it seems to me I'm terrible. My phone is in my hand all the time. Do you think there's an ethical difficulty in creating algorithms, creating programs designed to keep you on the platform?
I do think that if your goal is just to keep people pumping money into it, it's like gambling. It's like a slot machine. It's not something that I would choose to spend my time on. I don't think that the big platforms are doing that themselves necessarily. They make enough money through ads. They don't need to be trying to keep you on the site for other reasons. Obviously, the more you're on their sites, the more that you're clicking on their ads. But I think that in general, they try to do that by making their sites more integral to your life, not by trying to hook you addictively. But I do think that they benefit from people who are addictive on the site. And I certainly think there are a lot of third-party apps that try to play into that and try to get the addicts. I remember reading once when Candy Crush was really big that they got 90% of their revenue from 2% of their users who were addicted to it and kept paying money to be able to use it more. And that business model that business model bothers me.
And what function does the internet serve in your life? Are you being someone in tech? Does it make you wary of the internet?
I would say that I definitely am more careful than a lot of people. I choose to keep my photos on a photo website that I wrote myself and not to put them on Facebook hardly ever. And things like that, I just am more careful about where data is because I know that once it gets out, there's no getting it back. But I also have like the technical wherewithal to write my own photo website, which most people don't do. So I think that being in technology kind of gives me some tools that are not really available to most people.
And do you put a limit on your children's access to the internet? Do you encourage them to do things that aren't web-based?
We put a theoretical limit on. It's terrible because the iPads have a function now which let you say how much you've been on the iPad the last week, and so we realized how off we are from our theoretical limit to what the actual limit is that we actually allow them every day.
So with automation and improvements in AI, do you see a problem with the potential for obsolescence? In 10 years, all the truck drivers not having a place to work?
Yeah, I think that this isn't the first time that this has happened. The Industrial Revolution displaced a lot of workers, and the kind of information revolution did as well, and now this AI revolution has a chance to do it again. I think that historically, it doesn't cause jobs to disappear, it just replaces jobs with different kinds of jobs. But that can be really hard for the people whose industry goes away, and I think that historically, societies haven't been that great at dealing with that. I hope we get it better this time, but I'm pretty confident predicting it's going to be a difficult transition, and I think that it's something that's worth paying attention to.
I mean, there's been a lot of talk about UBI. Do you see that as an option?
I'm sorry. Talk about what?
Universal basic income.
Oh, I see. Yes. Is universal basic income a solution to that? I'm no economist. I know that there are plenty of economists who are in favor of it. I know that a lot of conservatives see it as an invitation to do nothing but sit around and play board games all day, but that sounds pretty good to me.
And so, I mean, how optimistic do you think we can all stride on into a bright future of technology, or do you think it will exacerbate the inequality that's in society?
I think in the end it will be neither. I think that technology is a tool, and like any tool, eventually society adapts to it, and the human race continues on basically the way they were before. I mean, certainly you can't imagine a world where you didn't have electricity or light bulbs or anything like that, but people in general are about as happy now as they were before those things were invented, even though life is very different. And I think that eventually people will adjust to all this new technology as well.
So your next game then, you go from one classic Euro designer to another, from Kramer to Knizia, and this is Schotten Totten. So when I spoke to Elizabeth, she told me the story about your wedding and sort of how special it was. So was this one of the games you chose to play at your wedding?
It was one of the games that we chose. We had quite a few games, but I chose this one because it's my favorite two-player game ever. And it's another game I'm terrible at. Of all the games I'm terrible at, this is perhaps the one I'm most terrible at. I can count on one hand the number of times I've won at it against many different people. I have no idea what I'm doing wrong, but it's clearly something. But I just love it. I love the tenseness of it and the difficult decisions to make, and just how the whole game plays out. My wife and I played Lost Cities a lot when we had our first kid. We take turns holding the baby and playing Lost Cities at the same time. And eventually I had to give her the baby in every game as a handicap because she kept beating me so consistently. But she beats me even worse at Schotten Totten.
And so Elizabeth told me about your wedding. What was the structure of your wedding and what role did games play in it? Yeah,
so our wedding was unusual. It was a month long. It had 4 wedding ceremonies in it. So what we did is we divided up the wedding into 4 basically week-long weddings, kind of 4 week-long kind of retreats / weddings. And my goal was to have a small wedding, but my invite list was an invite list for a large wedding. So the way that I reconciled those was to split it up into 4 different weddings. And so we went to this kind of retreat area in California for a month and invited people down to stay for a week at a time and kind of divvied it up. The first week was our families, and the second week was our high school and college friends, and the third week was our kind of friends from our 20s and so forth. And each week had a kind of a different theme, and one of the themes for one of the weeks was actually board games, and like the reception had like board games, like instead of place mats at every table, and you know, the centerpieces were like cut out of board games. It was really interesting to see a wedding designer's take on the board game industry. It was very different from my take. They were very attracted to good-looking games without regard to the game quality. I was like, I can't believe you're picking Flux, or whatever it was. But even the game weeks that were not board game focused, and the week that Elizabeth went to was not a board game week, still had a lot of board games. We had board games to play in kind of the hangout room where everyone was hanging out, and we incorporated board games into the week. For instance, and you have the freedom to do this when you have 4 wedding ceremonies. For one of the ceremonies, we did not have any of the wedding party assigned. Instead, we played a giant game of pit before the wedding, and instead of having commodities cards, we had rolls for the wedding, and so people would trade them, and whoever ended up with the officiant roll cards became the officiant, and whoever ended up with like the mother of the bride cards became the mother of the bride, and walked my wife down the aisle. And so we didn't know who the officiant for that wedding was going to be until the game ended, and then we went over to do the wedding right then.
And so, you know, you said you had 4 weddings. Did you have 4 amounts of wedding stress? Or by the time you were at the 3rd wedding, were you thinking, okay, let's just get through this one more time? Or was it a wonderful month of joy?
Yeah, no, we didn't have any wedding stress at all because, you know, the reason that weddings are stressful is because you only get one shot at it. You want it to be perfect. But when you get 4 shots at it, you don't need it to be perfect each time. And you can try new things and you can play around with things. And so we really took advantage of that. The first wedding, it was like a Jewish style wedding, and I was supposed to break the glass. You're supposed to stomp on the glass and break it. And when you watch Fiddler on the Roof, it's this happy situation. But in my wedding, it was terrible because I had to stomp on the glass like 6 times until I could find the break. But it didn't really matter because, you know, the next ceremony was another chance to do it or do something else. And so I feel that this approach really took the stress out. But it helped that we had amazing wedding planners who offloaded a bunch of the work for us. I didn't even know what the flowers would be for the wedding until I got there.
So I want to talk now about what you've gone on to do, your sort of philanthropic work. So could you tell me about Echidna Giving and sort of what are its aims?
Yeah, so echidna giving is something I founded. Echidnas are these Australian animals, which I just think are really cool. It has nothing to do with anything except I think they're cool. But echidna giving is focused on improving girls' education in the developing world. And it's predicated on the belief that one of the main ways to improve the lot of society in countries that don't already have it is to have women be more equal members of society, contributing to society and helping their children also be kind of contributors to society. And one of the things that's holding back right now is that in many places women don't have the same educational attainment that men do, and girls don't have the same opportunities and the same outcomes that boys do in a lot of these places. And so Echidna Giving is working to kind of bridge that gap and to make it so that everyone, men and women, can be kind of equal partners in society.
And can you fight against sort of ingrained traditions? I mean, I assume in some of the areas you're working, there is resistance to women going to school when they could be doing things like getting married and having children. I mean, to what degree can you combat that?
Well, the world is a wild and varied place. There are definitely places where, for religious reasons or philosophical reasons or just holding on to power reasons, there's a lot of antipathy to making changes like this. But in a lot of places, there's not. It's just a matter of of willpower in changing kind of ingrained attitudes and approaches. And there are definitely places where the government really wants to encourage girls to finish education and to go through it and to improve the quality. But a lot of the societies that they're dealing with, they can't afford it. They need the women to be working to help with childcare or to be making money from a very early age. And so it's just a matter of trying to convince those people that having the girls stay in school and learn is better for their families in the long run, and putting the infrastructure in place to make that actually be true. And it's definitely a long slog. I think that whenever you change the kind of structure of a community like that, it's not going to happen all at once. It's going to take generations, but you have to start somewhere.
And what do you do there? Is it simply a matter of you donating money, or do you go out and work hands-on?
I do not work hands-on. It's mostly a matter of finding partners who are already at work in those communities doing things that we think are really great and giving them money to help them grow their programs or to expand their programs into new areas.
You're someone who obviously has made money from your profession. Why be philanthropic? Did you feel like there was an obligation, or did you see an area that you felt you really needed to donate to?
No, I felt there was an obligation. I approached my philanthropy very analytically, which is no surprise to people who know me. I was thinking about, I made all this money. A lot of it was due to luck. I didn't really feel like, I deserved to have it or that I needed to have it. And so it was clear to me that I was going to give it away or put it to use in a way that benefited society the best way I knew how. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that, like, what can you do that will really make a difference? There are tons of worthy causes in the world, and it's really hard to say yes to one, which requires saying no to a bunch of others, just because you don't have the mental bandwidth to deal with a lot of different things at once. And it took me a long time to come to this area, but I've been really happy with it. I've been doing it for many years now, and I still feel it's as vital now as when we started.
And do you see inherent advantages to private philanthropy, or do you see something as state distribution of wealth to be preferable or not?
There's no way that we can compete in terms of the governmental aid agencies in terms of how much money we can give. And one of our goals, in fact, is to change the conversation amongst other major grantors, which includes sovereign wealth funds and includes governmental agencies, to think about girls' education as a crucial area worth investing in, because we're not going to be able to make a dent in the problems ourselves. And one of the things that we want to do is to kind of bring a team together to try to tackle that problem all together.
And so would you hope one day that sort of there's not a need for you to help and that states can take on the burden themselves?
It would be amazing if there wasn't a need for us anymore. But I think that one of the things that's really interesting about this field is there's always something new to think about. So once you start thinking about universal access to education, then you start thinking about quality of education. And once you are done thinking about quality of education, you think about job opportunities. And, education is just a start to really making a difference in these people's lives. So I think that even if we got everyone on board with our agenda, there would be kind of an addition to the agenda that would be worthwhile to have someone start thinking about. And, we would be excited to move on to that.
And so your next game then is more on the lighter end, and this is Bohnanza. I am someone who grew up sort of sat around the table playing cards with my family, and so card games are sort of, whenever I play one, even a hobby one, there's a sort of great nostalgia when I open that packet of cards. How important are card games to you?
I'm kind of a card game snob. I learned how to play bridge at some point in my life. Again, a game that I'm not very good at because I don't have the memory capacity for it. But whenever I play a trick-taking game, I'm always like, why am I playing this when I could be playing bridge? So to some extent, I have kind of mixed feelings towards card games. But I love Bohnanza, and the reason that I picked it is because it's my favorite gateway game. I don't know that that's a very typical gateway game that people use, certainly nowadays, but it's my favorite game to introduce non-gamers to kind of the hobby. And if we were in the apocalypse, there would probably be a lot of non-gamers there, so I'd bring Bohnanza along to try to bring them into the fold. I think that it's great because it's a social game, which a lot of people who have kind of played board games before and not liked it are kind of used to these kind of very analytical, brain-burning games or these very competitive games, and Bohnanza is nothing like that. There's a lot of player interaction, but it's not really cutthroat. The kind of trading that you do tends to be win-win kind of trading, and it's a very different type of game. I mean, the theme aside, which some people like and some people turns them off, but just the way that the game is played is very different from the way that most games that non-gamers have been exposed to is played. So I really like that for kind of opening their eyes to other ways of playing games.
And so, did you play this before you played other Uwe Rosenberg games? Because I'm often surprised that the guy who did Agricola did this.
Yeah, he's done a lot of varieties of games for sure that are different from each other. Yes, this was the first Uwe game that I played, and I think that it may be my favorite of his. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Agricola, but it's a little bit too brain-burny for me. And Bohnanza, I love playing whenever there's an opportunity. It's just, some games are just fun. They just have that kind of essence of fun in it.
So I want to talk now about the future. So where do you see yourself? Where do you see Echidna Giving in the next 10 years?
That's an amazing question. In 10 years, my kids will be like teenagers. So I'll probably be like holed up in a cave somewhere waiting for them to like me again. But I feel like professionally, it's the right question to ask about Echidna. I have no idea if I'll still be with Khan Academy or how much programming I'll still be doing, but I'm sure that I'll still be involved in Echidna because, as I mentioned, the problems there are problems that will take more than one lifetime. I'm hoping that Echidna will really change the conversation that people have around priorities around global philanthropy, and there'll be a lot more emphasis on education and girls' education in particular, and just a lot more thinking about gender and the role of gender in philanthropy, like thinking about the work that you're doing and kind of disaggregating it by gender, as we say, thinking about whether it has a disproportionate benefit to boys or girls. And I hope to see that trend continue, and I hope to see Echidna to continue to be a thought leader, getting people's attitudes towards giving in this area to change. I think that in 10 years we'll still be trying to solve a lot of the same problems, but my hope is that attitudes towards them will have changed.
I mean, do you see there being a bias towards men and boys when it comes to sort of aid and help?
I don't think there is, but I think that if there were, that there's often bias in outcomes and people don't know. So that's one of the things we're focusing on now a lot, is that when you do an after-school program, that both boys and girls are invited to, and you're like, oh, it's a gender-neutral program, but is it the case that in reality only boys go because the girls have to go home and take care of their baby sister? Or is it the case that boys and girls both go, but there's kind of like bullying going on, and so that it's like actually hurting girls rather than helping them? A lot of times you don't know that. If you just have a statistic that says this after-school program is helping the people who are in it, you don't know whether it's helping boys much more than girls or maybe boys much less than girls. And it's really hard to understand if you're benefiting girls or not when you're not doing that kind of data analysis and breaking it down by gender. And so one of the things that we're really focusing on is getting organizations to do that, to understand if they're helping boys disproportionately or helping girls disproportionately.
And you said that you're not sure whether you'll be programming in 10 years, but is sitting down, writing code, being a programmer still something that you enjoy, that invigorates you, that the puzzle of it is fun?
Yes, I love doing it. And I'm sure that I'll still be programming. Whether I'll be doing it professionally or not, have moved on to doing something else where I can write code as a tool to do it, but it's not like the main focus of my job. I couldn't say.
And so when you think about your career up until this point and what you sort of plan on doing in the future, what do you think your legacy will be, and what do you think people will say about you in 50 years?
Well, if people remember me in 50 years, that'll be amazing. If I'm still alive, I'd be happy to still be alive in 50 years. That'll be a bit of a stretch, but it's not impossible. So I hope that whatever they say, they'll be saying it to my face. But I mean, I'm not the kind of person who founds companies. I'm not the kind of person who's out there in public, making a face or a name for myself. I'm really interested in getting stuff done and identifying what I think are important problems and working on them. And so I don't hope or expect to be, remembered for a long time after I'm gone, but I'm hoping the stuff that I did is still around and still making a difference, and it's important to people.
And in general, when you look at the current state of the world, how optimistic are you about the future? It's when you see the big threat of climate change looming, it's hard to be optimistic. I mean, my wife and I have had serious discussions about whether we should talk to our kids that the Earth might not be habitable in 100 years, and maybe they should be thinking about whether they should have children of their own or not. And you're looking at it as you're seeing it as more and more unavoidable, and it's hard to be optimistic. But despite that, I'm optimistic anyway, perhaps without reason. I feel like we've had, as a species, have had big problems before and come through it. I think that the times may be hard. There might be people might look back into the time we're living in now is kind of a golden age that they think back to wistfully. But I think that the human race will pull through. So your final game then is Viva Topo, and this is the only kids game on the list. Have you played this one a lot with your own children?
I haven't played it a lot with my own children, but I have played it some. The reason I brought it is I have strong feelings about children's games because I play them with my kids. Two of my kids are really too young to play games, and the way we play games is we take the blockers pieces out and we put them into pretty designs on the table, and that's the game that we play. But my oldest is old enough to play games, and you see children's games fall into a few categories, most of which I hate. There's the games that have no skill at all, that the way that they balance the game is by making it so that children and grown-ups are equally likely to win because they have no say in the outcome. I don't even introduce those games into our household. I don't see any reason to play them. There are games that are memory games because kids actually have better memories than adults in general, and certainly better memory than me. And so if you were to play a memory game, then the kids would win a fair amount of the time. But because my memory is so terrible, I don't find those games to be fun at all either. And I feel like that's a huge proportion. And then there's some pattern matching games as well, which are kind of fun but get a little bit old after a while. Things that are kind of like set but aimed more towards kids. And so none of those really tickle my buttons, and I wouldn't like to play the games like those with my kids. But there's this other category of games, which is press your luck games, and I feel like they're underrepresented in the kid game market. And so I want to push for more press your luck children's games. I think that they're perfect games to play with kids because you can even the playing field by just being more aggressive than is wise. And most of the time you'll flame out and the kids will win, but you don't have to feel like you're sandbagging or letting the kid win. You're just playing in a different way. And sometimes, you're pressing your luck and it will pay off and you will win. And so it's not like you're letting the kid win all the time. It's not like you are deciding whether to let the kid win or not. You're actually just playing the game the way it's meant to be played and still having a fun time and having a more or less level playing field. My kids, at least, are very conservative. They never press their luck. And so oftentimes the slow and steady wins the game for them, and they have a really happy experience with it. And so Viva Topo is a press your luck game that involves cats and mice, and I think it's a lot of fun to play. My 6-year-old also really likes playing Can't Stop, which is even older than a lot of the games that I put on the list, but is still super fun for us to play as a family. And I wish that there were more press your luck games out there for us to play.
And how important do you think gaming is to a happy childhood?
I don't think it's important at all unless, the kid finds a lot of happiness playing games. I don't push games on our kids, and they generally would prefer to do something else, but every so often they'll be like, let's go play Sleeping Queens or whatever, and then we'll bust it out and play it. I think it's like, part of the healthy diet, as it were.
So, one last question then. You're herring to the cabin, 88 miles an hour, and your car goes round the corner. The back door flies open. 4 of the games fly down a ravine, into a river, and are swept away to posterity. Which game do you hope is sitting on the back seat of the car?
I would have to pick El Grande, because El Grande is my favorite game. But I'd have to say that was a press your luck I wish I hadn't done. I wish I had taken that curve a little slower.
So if people want to see what you're up to, if they want to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Gosh, I don't know. They would have to come to my house. I don't really have a presence on social media or anything like that. As I said, I'm not really an out there person, so it would be very difficult for them.
So, Craig Silverstein, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
And if you want to suggest a guest, or if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on @5gamesfordoomsday on Twitter. Or you can send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. You can give a rolling donation to help support the show at patreon.com/5G4D, or a one-time PayPal donation at the bottom of the website 5gamesfordoomsday.com. And if you feel like being swanky, you can go to tpublic.com/user/5gamesfordoomsday and buy an incredible t-shirt. And if I've managed to escape the people who sit too close to you on the train and the tweets of immense pomposity, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.